Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intelligent Inbound podcast brought to you by Smart Bike Media. I'm your host, Jen Spencer, and today I'm excited to be speaking with Jake Randall, who is Chief Operating Officer at Common Room. And if you're not familiar with Common Room, they're an intelligent community-led platform that really helps businesses deepen their relationships and build better products and drive impact for their customers. So welcome, Jake. So happy to have you on the show.
Thanks, Jen. It's fun to be here.
We were just catching up about Inbound and being there, being in Boston recently, and talking about just the embodiment of this community and how important community is for HubSpot, for their customers, and how it's been very intentional for HubSpot, in what they've done and how they've leveraged their community. And they're not alone, right? I'm continuing to see other high growth companies invest in communities. And it's something when I think over, the years of being in marketing specifically, it's something that it kind of used to be a nice to have. And now I see it becoming this integral part of an organization's go-to-market strategy. So help us, what does it mean for a company to have a community? And since this is the Intelligent Inbound podcast, I
Yeah.
want to know, what role does that play in inbound? And if we want to talk about outbound, I'll allow it. We can talk about outbound too.
I feel like outbound is probably like a 4-letter word or something on this podcast right now.
You know what? For me, outbound is an opportunity to use inbound techniques to have better targeted outreach, but that's we can have a
Yeah,
whole other
whole other
episode.
conversation. That's the next question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on. And it was I actually grew up in Boston, so it's great to be at Inbound this year. Little known fact: I was actually in the laborers union. I worked on the Big Dig. So for any Boston listeners out there, deep Boston roots. But on communities specifically, it has become a hot topic, certainly. And HubSpot is a great example of the power of community.
Mhm.
And what I'll say, first of all, is I think when we talk to companies, lots of folks think that community is it's a certain place, it's your forum,
Mm.
right? So you go to community.company.com, right? That is not actually what we think about when we think about community. Community is really anywhere your users, or for that matter, any place people are gathering to talk about the problem that you're helping them solve, right?
Mm.
And so, an example to use HubSpot, since we're talking about inbound conference, is HubSpot did a great job building a community around the practice of inbound marketing,
Yeah.
right? And their
Yeah.
community initially was, hey, there's a different way to do this. You don't need to do outbound, right?
Mhm.
As we laugh about what
Yeah.
we were just saying, there's this different way to reach your users that's more authentic, that's more value driven. That community of practice, which that didn't necessarily mean you were coming to HubSpot.com. It meant
Mhm.
you were out there's blogs being written, this is probably before HubSpot was doing it, but in today's day and age, there's tweets, there's LinkedIn posts, there's all these things. And eventually that community of practice and that knowledge starts to bring you closer to that company and how they can help you solve those problems. And then you start to build a community of product. And in
Mm.
HubSpot's case, that's where they've had a lot of success. That's what Inbound becomes. Inbound becomes this massive community gathering for them where you can
Mhm.
come together, share best practices, et cetera. But you start to feel this sense of belonging. It's very value driven. And I think honestly, HubSpot's an amazing example of the power of
Mhm.
community, right? So that's kind of how we think about community. And so what I'll just highlight there is it's not one place, it's everywhere your users or your potential users are talking about you and the problems you can solve. And then obviously, how does that relate into inbound? Well, we think of it as it's honestly kind of the top of funnel to inbound, or like to a PLG motion. How do people discover you? Well, they talked at Inbound this year that email open rates are
Mhm.
way down, that most Google searches don't end in a click. So SEO is down. People still have problems they're trying to solve. People still have
Yeah.
questions out there. But instead of clicking on the ad you've served up in the Google search, they're tweeting about it, or they're in a subreddit, or they're asking their community, their peers on LinkedIn. And so that's kind of how we think about it, is how do you then harness that organic conversation to help people understand the ways that you can help them in their business.
Mm. Wonderful. Yeah, and it's that like that vague or ambiguous sort of word of mouth, right? How do we
Yeah.
get the word out, right? How do we people kind of get my business from word of mouth? What does that really mean, and how do you start to define it? How do you start to measure it, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
with
and I'll say people are more digital than ever, right? For all the
yeah,
reasons that people talk about, right? Something happened over the last couple of years, right? We're all working from home and more digital. So that word of mouth is more and more becoming digital, right?
yeah,
And that creates a massive opportunity to have, I thought that the team at HubSpot did a great job at Inbound talking about this evolution of value,
hmm
right? And the process of selling, and it's evolved. And I think now, with all these great new channels, with this broad definition of community, there's an opportunity to have a totally different value prop and
hmm
conversation with your customers and users.
hmm I think I'm trying to think back of when it was probably maybe it was 2 years ago. I saw, and I think it was HubSpot, and maybe there was someone else out there who. I mean, I'm sure there was got to be some. I don't know what every company in the world is doing, but I saw. I mean, they had roles. They were hiring people to for community led
Yeah.
growth. Like
Yep.
they started putting money there. Whereas this was something that a marketing manager in the past might have sort of handled. It might
Hmm.
have lived there. It might have lived maybe in customer success. But honestly, I feel like it's lived more with like maybe social media,
Yep.
right? Now we're seeing that these roles are being carved out. So that means money, headcounts being allotted to these roles.
Hmm.
And I know companies don't just allot headcount for the sake of it, right? There's a reason why. So let's talk about some success metrics, right?
Sure.
How do you know when your community is successful? What are the key performance indicators that you should be thinking about? And then the big question I have is how long do you give that endeavor to actually take off?
Yeah.
Because I, in my seat as a CEO, I know I am very impatient.
Yep.
So I know I'm not alone, right? But it's obviously something that I'm assuming has to be nurtured,
Hmm.
right? And has to be kind of fed and taken good care of, right? How long do
Yeah.
you get to see this success?
Yeah. So, I'll just say, yes, it takes time. I think mm, there's a lot of things, like, I don't know, think about Inbound and like SEO and writing, blogs and content that's going to drive traffic and move you up in the ranks. That takes time also. So I think most of these techniques,
Yeah.
honestly, take some time,
Yeah.
right? Believe me, I wish, having just, gone from a large public company to being the COO of a startup, I wish I could just turn SEO on overnight, right? It takes
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of ways to think about it. So, and I'll kind of go through. So we work with a lot of different companies. HubSpot's a customer of ours. Companies like Figma, Asana, Atlassian, Webflow, Grafana, Cribble, DBT. So companies that we've heard of that have really leveraged
hmm
community to grow. They've all come at it a little bit, or they're at it in different parts of their journey, right? And so when it comes to what are some of the initial KPIs, it's really looking at just members of your community and what is the growth
hmm
of that. And so there's a lot of similarities to social in that regard. I think people are probably more familiar with that. That's something that's been more prevalent over the last 10 years. But are you getting more and more people to talk about you? Are you getting more and more people
hmm
to engage in the topics that you care about and think about? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'd encourage everyone. Claire Butler, who we work closely with at Figma, that just had a great outcome. I'm sure everyone saw it. She wrote a great
hmm
article about how community-led growth was at the core and the foundation of Figma's story and how they
Mm,
approached that. But the net of it is they started with, well, who are the influencers? Who are the people out there who are talking about design in their case, right? And how do you get
Mhm.
close to them
Yeah.
and how do you influence the design community? There's a different way to do this, right?
Mhm.
Similarly, how would you go influence marketers that you can do inbound marketing, right? As a new way to do it. Um, so I think you start with that is just, and then ultimately what we see with a lot of successful communities is that they start to be a place where your community members are answering each other's questions. So we even
Mhm.
see this at Common Room. We have a community. So if anyone is interested in community-led growth, you can come join Uncommon. It's hosted in Slack. But people will post something, hey, I'm thinking about how to do XYZ. And instead of my salesperson or marketer or whomever needing to go
Mhm.
answer them, another community member will say, hey,
Mhm.
well, like, have you thought about doing X? And it's not always do it in common room. It's just like
Yeah.
best practices generally for
Yeah.
how are you a DevRel leader? How are you a community manager? And so you start to see those sorts of things happen, right? Where it's not just that you're getting more conversations, but it is truly this kind of self-sustaining, value-added
Mhm.
organization. And then I think the last thing that we get into is then tying that all out into how is it affecting the business metrics you care
Mhm.
about. So we just did a big study with Asana, who's a customer of ours. They've got a great community, a great kind of PLG community-led growth story, and what they were able to show. They have millions and millions of users because you can,
Yeah.
it's kind of B2C/B2B, but
Mhm.
folks that are engaged in their community have a 3x higher feature adoption and in
Mm.
turn a 2.5x higher spend, right? So
Mm.
that, and and you're talking about millions of users on either side of that bright line.
Yeah.
And so there's actual data saying, hey, no, like you can do this differently, right?
Mhm.
Another great story on this, I'll say, in terms of like the success metrics, is we work with a lot of commercial open source companies that are, they're inherently kind of community driven, right? These
Right.
products were created by communities of developers,
Yeah.
in GitHub, basically, right?
Mhm.
So now you've got, in that case, we're seeing SDR teams saying, "Oh, our new inbound marketing is actually folks engaging in our community." And by the fact that they're asking a question in GitHub or
Yeah.
in a Stack Overflow, they're telling, like, that's the same thing as filling out a form or however you would say that in
Mhm.
traditional marketing sense. They're raising their hand saying, "I want help. I'm looking for an answer." So they're like, "Why are we sending emails? Go meet them where they are, answer their
Right.
question." Massive increase in conversion, massive increase, and there's a way to do that. It's not the traditional message, but it's a value driven story. It's, hey,
Mhm.
we noticed that you asked this question in a subreddit, in Stack, in a GitHub discussion, via Twitter. Happy to jump on a quick call and like help you answer that. And they're like, oh, great. Yeah, I wanted an answer. Now I have one.
Yeah.
I didn't want an email. I wanted someone to come tell me
Yeah.
where I told them I wanted an answer. Right.
Yeah.
So that's, I don't know, that kind of gives that gives the perspective of kind of how we see communities grow, get people engaged, get them talking to one another. And then how does it actually drive that impact on the business?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and it's something I would 100% prescribe to any organization that's like, all right, I need to do marketing, I need to do sales, and I sell to our buyer is someone like a developer, or
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, a lot of folks in financial services,
Yep.
brokers, agents, people, there are certain people who are just more challenging. They're just more challenging to
Yeah.
market to and sell to, especially like a developer is like, just give it to me. Let me play with it. I want to try it. I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
I don't want to schedule a meeting, right?
But I think
Um,
about this, I mean, like, it's funny just on that. So I 100% agree. Yes. But also I joke, everyone has a community. You're just not listening, which is kind of like
yeah.
marketing y,
Yeah.
right? But the reality is, I don't know, like think about anything. There's people out there that are talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and, like if you Google anything, one of the beauties of it is that you can usually find an answer, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, like by definition, there's a community out there of people that care about this, that are creating content, that are having discussions. You end up in some Quora or some Reddit, or there's a
Yeah.
YouTube video on how to do XYZ home improvement in your house. that's like, there's a, like, I'm a, right. Like I do that all the
Mhm.
time, much to the chagrin of my wife. I'm always like, no, we don't need to hire someone. I can just go do it myself. Because there's a community of people that like post YouTube videos of how to do home improvement. So like, and I think that's the thing for people to think about too, is that it doesn't have to always be about your company. I think a
Mhm.
great way to start is go engage with this community of practice
Yeah.
concept, right? And go find the people that are talking about the problem that other folks are there for listening to. And if you can get them to understand what you're doing and how they can help, that is this, again, organic kind of value driven conversation.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I would say that's a far better place to start than it being about your product for
Yeah,
sure.
don't just assume that you can get everyone to join your Slack or your
Yeah.
Discord or your whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think product related for your existing customers, sure, probably, right?
Yep.
But if you're wanting to use it as a
Yeah.
marketing channel, you want to
Yep.
go where and even more so, I would look at, well, where are there people being underserved? Like where is
Mhm.
there not someone who is championing that community, who's leading the charge, and how can you go in and be part of that conversation and
Yeah.
help be a leader, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I mean, it kind of gets into it's very close early on, I would say, to like this idea of like influencer marketing, honestly,
mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Influencers are influencers because there's a community of people that care about whatever they're influencing about, right?
yeah.
And so how do you get close to them? How do you understand that so that you can start to build this sense of, belonging around the folks that you want to be interacting with and how you
Mhm.
can help them?
So I guess what would you say to um, an executive team that's thinking about doing this, like that would get them to fund it, right?
Yeah.
To put energy there. I mean, how do you know as an organization that it's the right time for you to make this kind of investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would say is that one of the beauties of community is, you're not going out and buying some enrichment provider where it's super expensive, right? It's like it is
Mhm.
kind of organic and it's something that, as I said, everyone has a community. I talked to a
Mhm.
company this morning. They sell a security tool. It's like, you have a community, there's a bunch of CISOs out there. They're trying to figure out how to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And they're like, it was their head of demand gen and their CMO. And they're like, oh, yeah, wait, like I was thinking about this as this massive thing that I had to go do. I had to go spin up a Discord server and I had to go, and it's like, nope, like you have a community. You just got to
Yeah.
go meet them where they
Yeah.
are and start the conversation. And so, what I would say is that it becomes a much more organic way to drive that traffic. And what we see is that it is the growth engine for a lot of these companies that I've already mentioned. Right. I mean,
Mhm.
my guess is most people listening to your podcast or this podcast, are very familiar, if not users of HubSpot.
Mhm.
HubSpot's, I would argue, a lot of HubSpot's story, and they talked about this at Inbound, was they built a community around there's a new way to do marketing, right? And that ends up being their
Mhm.
success. So like it's never too early to invest in it because
Mhm.
fundamentally what you're trying to do is help people understand there's a different way to solve their problem.
Mhm.
And the best way to do that is to find the people that are talking about that problem, i.e. your community, and engage with them in a value driven way.
Mhm. Well, maybe this is a takeaway kind of homework assignment. I would love to know if of any case studies of any examples of organizations that have actually replaced outbound sales with investments in community and
Interesting.
actually growing community.
So one thing I'll say on this is maybe like my own, I don't know if it's a hot take, but I think it's hard to say, I don't know, that you can fully replace any individual channel, right?
Sure, sure, yeah.
Um,
I'm just saying choices, right? You can only
yeah, you
like
have
do so
choices.
much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think like what I'd say is that there's definitely companies that we know of that have, you still need to generate awareness. And unfortunately, what I'd
Mhm.
say is like outbound is often the way early on to generate awareness,
Sure.
right? But then what we see is companies, I'll say, changing that journey
Mm.
into something where they want to drive them into their community. It becomes a differentiator. I'll say even like
Mhm.
at Common Room, we're like, hey, even when someone comes inbound to us,
Mhm.
one of our calls to action when we respond is join our community.
Yeah.
And what you see is they're like, wait, hold on, there's all these, there's thousands of people that are doing the same job that I'm doing that are trying to answer these questions. And
Mhm.
now I can go ask them. And what you've immediately established is this idea of like trust, essentially, right?
Mhm.
Hey, if these other folks are in Common Rooms community talking about the things that I want to, solve, then it must be that Common Room is providing value to them. That's like the implicit thing that's happening
Mhm.
there, right? And so this is a long-winded answer to I don't know personally of anyone who said like we're no longer going to do outbound, we're going to replace it with community. But I
Mhm.
know a lot of companies that have said, oh wait, here's what community is doing. Oh, when someone's engaged in our community, I mean, like we've gone through with like large public companies, and
Mhm.
if someone's engaged in your community, which could be they're tweeting about you, that could be anything, it's not just like
Mhm.
your forum, higher ACVs, faster, sales cycles, right? Higher conversion rates,
Mhm.
because you're establishing, essentially it's a referral based peer-to-peer sale. You're establishing
Mhm.
trust, right? And
Yeah.
so can you create different motions, different playbooks, if you will, that help you leverage that and therefore can affect those outcomes in a more scalable way also, right? Because like I'll tell you, I spent 10 years at Okta. We were always trying to, like, we were going back to the same customers and probably the same people over and over, be like, hey, can you do a referral
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
this deal, right? And it's like, and that gets tiring for them. There's only so many bottles of wine you
Right.
can send, right?
Right.
And instead now it's like, no, like people don't ask for referrals. Like I haven't gotten asked for referrals since I've been at Common Room. So I can up like there's thousands of people in Uncommon, your community, telling me this is the right choice, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes that yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I this morning actually I was on LinkedIn and someone who I don't know posted a question about how to do something. It was an integration with HubSpot and Zoom Info.
Hmm.
No, sorry, HubSpot and Zoom, the webinar platform.
Okay.
Um, Slip there, and someone else who I don't know. Um, Shared an article that we have written about exactly how to do it and all the pitfalls and everything. And it's like the most beautiful thing about like content
Community.
marketing, like producing great content and then
Yeah.
having a community that you don't even know is there. I don't even know, like, right? Like I have this
Yeah.
evangelist out there that I
And
didn't even
that's
know
And so
about.
that's like a lot of what Common Room then, helps you with is you're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, how do you understand that? So that, in your case, you're like, wait, hold on. Who is this person? What do they
Yeah.
do? Like, and they're, you know, sending people to original content happens to be your content, but like that
Yeah.
whole idea, right? I mean, what we see too is people are creating content around like your product or around these areas, and how do you
Hmm.
discover that and how do you find it, right? I mean, I have a story that someone that we had never spoken to, but I'll say
Hmm.
they are in a senior role at a large search company,
Yep.
um, tweets out, hey, has anyone ever used Common Room?
Mm.
And because of what Common Room does, we know this is happening, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
gets fed directly into our Slack channel, and everyone's like, "Oh my!" Like, right, looking at it,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, like, there's just a stream of our customers tweeting back,
Yeah.
saying, "We use it, we love it. It's much better than this competitor." Yes, like right, and you're like, "This is incredible." Right, like they didn't come inbound,
Yeah.
right? They're asking their community,
Yeah.
and our community, and which overlaps with our community, if you will, and they're
Hmm.
saying, yeah, no, it's a great tool, you should definitely go try it. And that's what drove them to then sign up for it, right? Similarly, I'm sure with this LinkedIn post that you're talking about, they probably hit your website and were like, whoa, there's a bunch of cool stuff here that would be
Yeah.
helpful. That's amazing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, let's talk about more of like kind of day to day, like your job,
Mhm.
your responsibilities, um, and and maybe even we can also think about it through the frame of lens of common rooms about 50 employees, right?
Yep.
Versus coming from Okta,
More
much
employees.
right, much larger
Yeah.
company. But so one first question I have is just as you're leading this team, how are you preparing them for shifts or changes that are happening in the industry, whether it's in your industry, maybe the competitive environment, maybe in the market,
Yep.
maybe with like other kind of martech solutions that are out there.
Yeah. No, it's a great
Yeah.
question. So this is common across a lot of companies, but our number one value is essentially customer empathy. So really
Mm,
what we care about, and when you think about the changes that are happening, and particularly, I would argue, if you're going to join a startup, this is my third startup. My first one did okay. I joined Okta when there's 30 people and no revenue, and then it did, and I left when there was more people and a lot more revenue.
okay, and that did great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that did well. Yeah, that one
yeah,
was a good bet. But
yeah,
common room's going to be even better.
yeah.
But early on, and I think there's a lot of difference around like what stage you're at. Early on, it's about really being empathetic and understanding what your customers are going through and
Mm,
building for them. And so I actually think it's a super interesting story how we approached Common Room early on, which was that we didn't just launch a PLG, let's go. We actually
mhm,
went out and we found, and I should say the founders, because I joined afterwards, but found 30 of the top community leaders and said, tell us what you want.
mm,
What would, and it's only once, folks at Atlassian and Figma and Asana and HubSpot and all these companies that I've mentioned that, we're proud to call our customers and our
mhm,
partners were willing to pay us, that we actually went out and we're like, okay, now we can go GA.
mhm,
Right. I think but I think that's a really indicative story of like, if you're an early stage company and everything that's happening right now, what do you do? Focus on your customers and focus on really making sure that you're helping them solve their problems. Because right
mhm.
now, what's happening with all the change that's happening, what everything that's happening, and we're in a recession or nuclear winter or whatever's happening
Yeah.
out there, right? People that can't afford, quite literally, to purchase things or do things that aren't going to accrete to their goals and what they need to accomplish. And so don't think that you're smarter than your customer base,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Be maniacally focused on what do you need? What are your problems? What is your boss asking you for?
Yeah.
Okay, if I can help you with that, then that is going to mean that we can continue to work together, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's how I think. I don't know if that's a good answer for it, but like
Yeah.
just focus on solving folks' problems and understanding how you can help them, and then everything else be agile around that to ensure
Yeah.
you're providing that value. I think it was obviously very different at Okta. I think there was still that aspect of
Mhm.
things, but I think the biggest difference is, quite frankly, like you have a lot more data when you're 6,000 people in a $1 billion revenue company.
Yeah.
And so you can make decisions at a very different level versus being more qualitative right now
Mhm.
and how we lead and how we help people understand what to do next.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's it's interesting, like, you can you're at a small company, you're really agile, you can kind of turn on a dime. A larger company, to your point, you're gonna have more data, you're gonna have more
Yeah.
resources, but man, it I mean, even our organization, when I joined in 2017, I was the 28th person, and now
Yeah.
we're almost 200,
Yeah.
and it's just rolling something out. Like you can't just pull everyone into a room very
Yep.
easily, even a virtual room, right?
Yeah.
With time zones, it can be challenging.
I think the other thing
And
I'll say on that, yeah, is just like try to focus a lot on the why. I
Mhm.
think like that's one thing that I learned. I don't say the hard way, but I'll say I learned it at Okta as we were scaling very rapidly. Is that it's easy to, and I was fortunate, I was always very senior at Okta, it's easy to make a decision and try to decree it down. Probably the way to say it. And like to some extent, like you have to do that. That's part of your job. But I think people often almost underestimate their team. And
Mhm.
if you give folks the courtesy of here's why we're doing this, here's why it's important, here's what we're trying to do, like you should hire people that are smarter than you. And if you explain the
Mhm.
why, then they can help you achieve those goals versus just dictating down here's what we're going to do.
Mhm.
Right. So I think that's the other big thing I would say on like the change management side is if you call you call an all hands, like here's what we're gonna go do. People are kind of like,
Mhm.
okay. If like here's why we're doing, here's what we're trying to accomplish, here's what we're seeing, you'll get feedback. They'll say, well, there's a better way to do this and that kind of stuff. Right.
Mhm. Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to experience and then been able to bring back to SmartBug is I was at this Wharton executive program and we were taught, what, so what, now what
Yeah.
kind of approach,
Yeah.
right? To a problem. And bringing that into our all hands meetings, our quarterly business reviews, it allows you to lead with authenticity, and build trust with your team, but also inform the team,
Yep.
and can be really, really important when you're talking about organizational change for sure.
Mhm.
What what are the metrics that you look at, like that
Ooh.
in your role? Like if you have like one dashboard you view every morning, what's on it? Like what are the things that you're accountable to?
Yeah. So just quickly as COO at Common Room, I basically run everything that isn't EPD. So go to market, finance, legal, all of those kinds of fun things. The reality is at a startup, I focus mostly on the go to market,
Mhm.
right? Finance
Yeah.
stuff. It's like every month, I'm like, did we burn more cash than we said we were going to? No, we didn't. Okay, we're good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, what I focus on the most at an early stage startup where growth is our goal is really just looking at the funnel. So, I care about are we generating, essentially new contacts,
Hmm.
new leads in our in our pipeline or in our funnel. I care about how are we trending against pipeline goals,
Hmm.
right? Which are obviously different. There's a conversion
Hmm.
there, and I focus a lot on are we moving deals along in a way that we discussed. And so,
Hmm.
that's something where you can, a bunch of different ways to see that deals that are stale in your pipeline, deals, those kinds of things. But it's really about, I joke, it's like, is the conveyor belt running at the speed we want it to run on? And are we putting enough things on the front of the conveyor belt? Right.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I think about it. That is to
Hmm.
me what I care about right now. That's obviously, again, that's specific to working at an early stage startup. That's,
Sure.
that's got a bunch of money from great VCs and that
Hmm.
we're trying to go grow quickly versus, you know, other roles I've had in the past, right? But I think anytime you're in a, a any kind of COO position, any C-level job, quite frankly, it's like, are you doing the right things? What is your business model? And are you
Hmm.
tracking against the leading indicators to hit revenue?
Hmm.
Right? Like that's a lot of what it comes down to. Understand your model, understand how things work, and are you going to be able to go hit the targets that you've set forth?
And what do you do if you're looking at data and it's getting uncomfortable? You're going, this is not, things are not looking the way I would like
Yeah,
them
yeah.
to look, right? Do you have a go-to kind of plan for that? Maybe has that happened yet? I don't
Oh
know.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
not a common room, but I mean,
Yeah.
it happened plenty at. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I joke, again, I had this great run at Okta for 10 years. I ended up running like a third of our business in my last
Mhm.
role. So I was the GM of one of our two main product lines. Um, Okta is a great success story, but in the moments it wasn't a given. It was never easy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think the main thing on that is if things aren't looking good, it's there's never an easy fix, right? I think like
Yeah.
that's the thing maybe to keep in mind. I'd say first is that They'll call a meeting, get everyone together, get in a room, talk about things, look at some PowerPoint slides or whatnot. It's like if it was easy, then someone let's assume someone would have done something, right?
Sure.
And like we,
Right, right.
and like we wouldn't. And so I like, but I've been in a lot of meetings where it's like, well, like go fix it, and you're like, well, like like come on, that's not reasonable, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think this is the biggest thing I'd say here when things aren't going well is you have to create a safe place for people to try new things, right? Because if things were so like quickly, things were
Mhm.
going well and now they're not.
Mhm.
So like what's changed? Well, the reality is probably like nothing, and that's the problem,
Right.
right? Is that we haven't evolved and you're not going to bat 1000 when it comes to trying new initiatives, right?
Mhm.
I think everyone should go create a community clearly, but like I'm sure it won't work for someone, right?
Right.
But you should go try, right?
Mhm.
Or I think everyone, whatever you can increase your spend in X Y in paid. Well, like it's probably going to cost more if you do that, right? Like
Mhm.
there's all these things that you can get into, but if biggest thing I'd say is like if things aren't going well, then bring in people that you trust and ask them to bring you potential solutions and then trust them to go try them and also know that not everything is going to work and that's okay.
Mhm.
And and like it's quote okay to like fail as long as we're learning.
Mhm.
That's probably what I'd say is like there is no easy fix. Hire the right people, trust them, and let them go safely fail to some
Yeah.
extent. And you'll find things that work, to be clear. And
Yep.
then you won't, because not everything's going to fail. You're going to learn, you're going to evolve, and you'll get better. There's actually just a great thread I was reading. So one of the things I did at Okta was from the go-to-market perspective, I led our acquisition of this company Auth0 for $6.5 billion.
Mhm.
Um, and someone from the Auth0 team is on their demand gen team. Just is like it's a whole thread on Twitter that they just were posting about basically the Auth0 wasn't going to like they weren't hitting their targets.
Mm.
And what did they do? And they
Mhm.
literally they pulled everyone together. They said essentially half of the people on our GTM on our go to market team, you're
Mhm.
now working on quote special projects,
Hmm.
and they just let them go try things,
Hmm.
right? But I think
Yeah.
that's actually a great example. I don't know why I didn't even think of it until after I gave my answer of like in practice and being like, no, like things aren't working. So like we're not just gonna keep doing like what's the definition of insanity,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like doing the same things, having different outcomes, or whatever that saying is. It's like if you're
Yeah.
doing the same things and it's not then it's not working. So go try new
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think in the spirit of exploration, experimentation, I love asking our guests to dream a little bit and imagine I was able to I give you a kind of a blank check
mm,
for a campaign for
yeah,
something like something specific, right? From in marketing, preferably, right?
yeah.
Where would you put it?
So obviously, this is in my current role as COO
Yeah.
of yeah. So I would put it in something that is, I'll say, very like thought leadershipy and kind of pushing the envelope of how
Hmm.
people think about things. I think,
Mhm.
I and the background or the context on that is that I love working at startups that are trying to do things differently, right? Like
Mhm.
that's if you're going to go work at a startup, like you try to go. That's like I think that's the whole point,
Yeah.
right? Fundamentally, we believe that the way that people are going to find and adopt technology is changing. It's going to be much
Mhm.
more socially and community driven, but our job is to go and help people understand what that looks like and what that motion will be. And so you have to therefore a little bit get out over your skis and say there's a different way to do things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That you shouldn't just go sell and market the same way, right? And
Yeah.
so because people aren't listening, people aren't opening your emails, they're not converting on your paid ads or whatever it may be. So I would, if money were no object, I don't know if this is like actually what I would do, like tactically, but it's like the billboards. Like, what's the thing where you're like, wait, this is like totally different thinking. This is a radical thought. I need to
Yeah.
go look at this because we have all these success stories. I've talked about some of them where we've worked with companies that I think most folks would want to emulate. I think everyone wants to go get acquired by Adobe for $20 billion in the case of
Sure.
Figma. They were community led from the get-go. So
Yeah.
how do you do something that is I put money into like something that like you're like, whoa, that is like a
Yeah.
shocking billboard, that's a shocking campaign, but
Yeah.
like I need to go pay attention.
Yeah.
But those are also really hard to measure, as you know, right? As like a marketer, so
Yeah.
that's why I give that answer. If money and time were no object, I'm like
Right.
I would go big,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. That's the point of the question. It's like
yeah,
we all have to, because even in cultures, even in organizations that have a culture of experimentation, there's still a bottom line, right?
yeah,
Like, and there's still there's still, attribution is really important. There's still all these things
yep,
that are influencing you. And so you then are going to play it safe to some extent, right?
yeah,
Or you're going to make this one bet that you think you've got enough data to support that bet, right? And so this is me just asking, like, hey, like your gut, like where do you
yeah,
say, like, if you didn't have to be held accountable to that money, right? Like where would you sort of drop it? So
yeah. I
I
mean,
think
that's
your
just
answer's
like I
fair.
mean, I think this is like the example of this that always comes to mind is Salesforce's software is dead,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's like that had nothing to do actually with what they do as a
No.
technology, but it was where you're like, wait, what?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, one more question for
Sure.
you. So for a business leader that's listening right now, that's thinking about investing in their own community, what's most important? What's like the number one takeaway you want them to have as they wrap up this show?
My number one takeaway would be you have a community, you're just not listening,
Hmm.
right? And so don't think that it's some, Herculean effort to set it up. There are
Yeah.
people out there that are talking about the problem that you solve. Doesn't
Mhm.
mean that they're necessarily coming to your website and converting on inbound assets, but they're out there and they're talking. You're just not listening. And if you can go meet them where they are, they're already telling you that they want to engage in that conversation.
Perfect. Jake, thank you so much for joining me. If anyone who's listening now wants to learn more about you, wants to learn more about the work you're doing at Common Room, maybe wants to join your community,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure. So thanks, Jen. Think of commonroom.io is
Okay.
our website. There you can join our community. It's called Uncommon. So it's a Slack community. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can tweet at me. You can do all the fun social channels and happy to talk just broadly about the topic. It's a fun thing. And I really believe, that we can change the way that people think about discovering and deploying software.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you all for listening. Please join us next week for another episode of the Intelligent Inbound podcast. You'll get to meet another phenomenal industry leader just like Jake. And if you learned something today, please pay it forward by rating and reviewing on your podcast listening platform of choice. Make it a great day, everyone.